to our Donkeys and Dragons video chat, where we spend about 15 minutes chatting about a specific topic. Today, our guest is Antony Marcano. He's from the UK and has been a leader in modern software development practices since the early days of extreme programming, so a long time. He's a coach and a consultant and has led teams to elite performance levels as measured by Google's DORA key metrics. As when we first met Antony, and it's quite a few years ago, we won't say how many years ago, it was at a Star West conference. One or both of us, I think both of us, were giving a talk, and some fellow was in the back, Antony, of course. He asked some really tough questions and shared observations that made us think. We couldn't just answer like we normally do. At that conference, he was helping to raise money to save Bletchley Park, which, like most people, we had never heard of before. We ended up having some great conversations and have enjoyed inspiration from Antony ever since. Hello, I'm Janet Gregory.
And I'm Lisa Crispin, and welcome, Anthony.
Hello, that would be me. Yeah, I remember that conference. That was a while ago. And but what I remember specifically was I remember there was a few points in your talk where there was these really powerful points that you were making. I don't remember what they were. I just remember thinking really powerful points, but you almost like glossed over them, maybe to because of the time you had for the talk or something like that. And I was like, I think if anyone missed that, they can't afford to. They have to hear it. So I thought, I don't want to try and make your point. Let me think of a question I can ask that will get you to make the point. And you did. But I think it drew out a couple of other things. So I was happy about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the ensuing discussion um, between us really helps us and the audience, kind of take some concepts and move forward with them. I know it had a long-lasting effect on me, and we got to meet you, Anthony, and we also learned about Bletchley Park, which was a really turned a really important thing for me in my life, and we got to get contributions for you for our first book.
Yeah.
So that was all good in so many ways. Um, and so recently, you kind of came back in our consciousness because we were really struck by your LinkedIn post about your adaptation of Henrik Knyberg. I'm not sure how to say his name after all these years. His skateboard to car sketch, where he shows, you don't start with a car, you start with something simple and you move it up to something more complicated. And we'll provide links to all this stuff on the YouTube page. And you included a new unhappy ending that shows how true agility helps us manage risk. What led you to tweak Hendrik's metaphor that way?
It actually came about through a number of times where I would sort of share these slides with clients of mine to try and help them understand the distinction between, you're not trying to incrementally build the product you have in mind. You're trying to incrementally and iteratively solve the problem your customer has. And the one thing that, whilst he did touch upon it in his blog post that talked about the original sketch, he didn't really, for me, really capture the story behind what the user was looking for. And the user has this car in mind, right? That's what they want. So what I wanted to do is try and help people visualize what's the problem we're solving here and understand how each of those evolutions of the product helped solve their problem. So, for the benefit of anyone who hasn't seen it briefly, I will just say that the story I tell is that the user wants to get to work. They've got a 90-minute journey each way on foot, and they want a car because they think it's going to make their journey shorter. And I explain how, in the meantime, the team gives them their first evolution of the product, which shortens their commute time, i.e., the skateboard. Then they iterate on that and make it a bit more comfortable. Doesn't help the journey time, it just makes it more comfortable. And they increment upon that again, and it gets faster with a bicycle, so they shorten the journey time again. And then they have a motorbike, and then they get to the end and they get their car and they're really happy, only it's now a 90-minute journey to work because they're stuck in traffic the whole time. And the reason I felt like changing that part of the story and adding that in is because I just felt like the fact that you can simply revert back to the motorbike because it's software, you know, and just go back to your 20-minute journey to work is one of the most empowering elements of taking this incremental and iterative approach to solving the customer's problem, not building the product you have in mind. And as a result of many of those conversations, it just evolved. And I think I've given it a few times as a lightning talk at XTC and a few other events, just using sticky notes where I'll draw the pictures on sticky notes.
Yeah, sticky notes works. And
Yeah.
and I think one of the key things is solving the customer's problem.
Yeah.
Because too often we solve the symptom. We need to build a car, and then we focus on that versus the problem or what are we trying to do? So I know I always ask that question. That's one of the first ones, that what problem are we trying to solve? Makes a huge difference as well. And the other key thing I think is, did we measure it? How do we know we solved the problem? And that says it all, that story. I love it.
You know,
So,
that's a really good point. I'm gonna explicitly mention that in the next evolution of the story, thanks to you. Thank you. Because I it's implicit because I keep explaining how much the journey
mhm.
time has been reduced, but I never actually explicitly call out the importance of actually measuring the value that you've delivered.
That's why we collaborate,
Yeah.
because we learn, right? Just like we did from your questions at the very beginning. Perfect. Um, and also, thanks to your post, we were reminded of your Marta model. Not sure
Hmm.
how many people know about that, but it's for managing risk as opposed to only mitigating risk. How did you come up with that Marta mnemonic?
Yeah, Marta, Marta. So
Yes.
back in ye olde 1990s, I was I was working at a large telecommunications company that happened to be British, and they sent me on this project management course, and the instructors there talked about mitigation. And risk mitigation was a word that I'd heard. I was relatively early in my career, maybe a couple of years in, and they said how much it frustrated them when people talked about mitigation. And I was like, I wonder why. And then they said, well, what is the definition of mitigation? I was like, oh, of course. It's just talking about reducing the impact of something. There must be other ways of doing it. And during this workshop, they kind of asked us all these different ways. And that really stuck with me. And a few years later, I was working with a client that was talking about risk mitigation. And actually, everything they were coming up with was talking about how they could reduce the impact of this risk. And I was like, what about the other ways we could manage this? And they were like, what other ways? And literally in that exact moment, I just came up with it. Like I just, for some reason, I just went, well, you can mitigate it, you can avoid it, you can reduce the probability of it happening, you can transfer the risk, or you can just accept it because maybe it's not so bad. And then I was like, oh, Marta, Marta. Okay, yeah, and we're going to call that Marta. So that was pretty much how it came about. Yeah, and I ended up writing an article about it. Actually, someone picked up the article and it got published in a magazine that at the time was called Corporate Insurance and Risk. I think they've been rebranded since then. I
Wow.
tried to find it because this was a long time ago, like in the early 2000s. But yeah, their archive of old articles isn't there anymore. But I think the important thing is that I think when people say risk mitigation, I think they usually mean managing risk. That's what I think
Mhm.
people mean. It's just that if you're constantly saying the word mitigation, you're almost like programming yourself to limit what your options are. So
Yep.
risk management, Marta, is just a way of just helpfully remembering the other options you have available to you.
It's one of the it's like me calling it quality management versus quality assurance or quality anything else. You're managing it versus doing one specific thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, and
and
I certainly am guilty of saying mitigation when I mean managing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the thing, and so and I think people I think if you have this model and you think about what are our options in each of these categories, and they're not mutually exclusive, you can do more than one. You
Yes.
can find ways of mitigating it. You can find ways of avoiding it. Um, transferring it's another interesting one. Like, the first time I heard that idea was actually on the course, and I was like, well, how could we transfer it? And then one of the instructors said, well, what do you think we're doing when we buy insurance? Like, we're transferring that
Yes.
risk onto someone else. Um, and or an example I give in some of my blog posts about this is, what if we're trying to um uh, buy our lunch, we got to cross a busy road. Well, we could transfer that risk by calling DoorDash or ordering via DoorDash, right? And let them go and get the food for us. But you got to pay for that privilege of transferring that risk, but that's another way of you could transfer that risk. So that's one of the ones that I think is perhaps the most obscure. But the one that I think people think about the least is accept the risk. Just accept it. Like, how bad will it be? Can we just manage it if it happens? Is the impact so small that if it happens, who cares? You know, this is the one that I think people think about the least. They're always trying to prevent bad things from happening, but actually sometimes it's okay.
So
Interesting.
I think about risk all the time. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do as testing
Yes.
professionals is get our teams talking about it. And yeah, I have come across even quite recently teams that they're using the extreme programming core development practices. They're doing test-driven development. They're doing continuous integration, continuous delivery. They're pairing. They're doing all these good practices. But yeah, they never even say the word risk. They never have any conversations. They take the requirements from the product owner and they build that. And then they put it in production and they get support tickets and they go, well, that's not really a bug. That's just not how that works. It just doesn't work that way. It's a missed feature. And it's like, well, are you okay with that? How do
Yeah.
you get teams to even just start talking about managing risk?
That's a really interesting point. And my honest answer is I don't. And the reason I don't try is because I think something I've sort of realized over the years is there's a lot of teams that don't necessarily live in a world where they have complete psychological safety. Hello, we've got another guest. They don't have complete psychological safety. And as soon as you mention a word that has any negative connotation, they want to not use it. A good example
Mm.
is bug, right? So I can't remember how many years ago it was now, but everyone used to call it a bug. And then suddenly I was in this environment where they were like, oh, we call them issues here. It's like, why'd you call
Yes.
it an issue? Well, because it might not be a bug. And there was all this stuff around it. I was like, oh, okay, we'll call it issue, fine.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think, yeah. So I think that maybe sometimes in a given environment, you mentioned some of these words that feel scary, um, can result in people withdrawing somewhat. So, and I've actually applied this same principle with even coaching teams in things like XP, because some teams are just completely anti-agile, anti-XP.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
well, let's just talk about the things that matter to you. So, in the example that you gave about, them shipping what they thought they were asked to build, and then finding that there were issues that came back, whatever you want to call them, bugs, issues, it's all feedback. What can we learn from it?
Mhm.
How can we avoid that situation in the future? How can we address it? Those are the kind of terms that I use, which in turn gets people talking about risk, but without calling it
Calling
risk.
it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
do understand. I do understand because I've been in, like yourselves, in so many different environments with different clients over the years. You've literally seen it all. And in some environments, even if it's actually everything that should create psychological safety is there, for whatever reason it isn't. And sometimes that's because people have brought their fears from other organizations that they've been in
Mm.
with them into this organization. And I think I do my best to try and go to where people are and then walk with them. And one day they might say the word risk. And as soon as they say the word risk, I can now, you know, but I might say to them, well, how could we address this? Could we reduce the impact of it?
Yeah.
Mitigate, you know, uh,
Ah.
could could we avoid it? Could we make this someone else's problem? So I don't necessarily sell the framework. I just use it to help inform the conversation. And then when we get to a point where they're, oh, that was really helpful conversation, I'll say, here's the easy way to remember it and leave them with that.
Yeah.
So that's the way I tend to address it.
Yeah. And I was going to say it's a hard game to play, but sometimes that's the only way to do it. You have to
Yeah.
talk around it, but just using different terms works quite well. But it still has to be addressed
Yes.
in some way. Yeah. And that's the important thing.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more quick question, and it'll be a quick one. As you know, Lisa and I talk about testing. We talk a lot about testing. Um, when you talk about risks, I don't think I've ever heard you talk about it with respect to testing. So, what do you think your feelings are about the relationship between managing risk and testing?
Yeah, I think it's very context dependent. I haven't really spoken about it much for a long time because I've just been very fortunate to be in a position where I've been able to build teams where you've got people who've kind of shed the titles of, tester, developer, whatever. Everyone's contributing to creating this product together. And most of the conversations about the things that could go wrong happen at the beginning of implementing a new story, not after the fact when people are experimenting and inspecting the product. So the things that we can anticipate, there's things that you can't anticipate. I've also been in a situation where the last 8 years, every team that I've helped establish, um, my teams that I've helped establish, not necessarily clients that I've worked with who just brought me in for to address a smaller challenge, but the teams that I've helped establish have a set of data that meant that testing and risk wasn't something we had to think about. And I'll give you an example. The most recent teams that I established, where I was actually head of engineering and I was building up the teams there from scratch. Um, they were shipping about 15 to 20 times a day. And so that's like what, 300-ish to 400 deployments a month. And the average number of defects in production was something like one per 400 to 600 deployments.
Awesome.
Wow.
So when you have so few defects that get to production, the idea of having to think about risk, for example, in risk-based testing, where you're having to identify the highest risk areas to test and hope for the best with everything else, just wasn't a problem for me for the last 8 years. It was before. Before that, it
Yep.
absolutely was. I did work environments where you had to take that type of approach, and Marta was a tool that I was using to help me think about,
Do that.
how do we address the risk in these different
Okay.
areas? The probability of the impact here is so low, we can accept it. You know, the change here is likely to ripple out into so many parts of the system there that we can't afford to accept the risk. So we've got to do one of the other things. And, I would use it as a framework for that purpose.
Okay. Yeah, an interesting thing is when you, and this is, I'm just going to say most people, when they talk testing, they're thinking testing after.
Mm,
When we talk about testing, we use our holistic testing model, which is thinking about testing ideas as
yeah.
well. So testing those ideas is where you start to probably talk about risk and things a little bit more before you ever write a line of code. Anyhow, that's it for timing. But you got something else to say, Anthony?
I was just going to say as well. I mean, for me, the testing ideas point is really really valid, especially in a test-driven environment, because you're not really
Great.
thinking about what could go wrong. You're thinking at first, how will we know if this works?
Mhm.
Which is almost like the flip side of what could go wrong. But then you do have the conversation about, okay, we've thought about all the stuff we want it to do. What about all the stuff we don't want it to be able to do? And then you incorporate that as well. And when that is an integral part of the conversations that you're having during development, rather than here's the ticket, do the work, ship it, actually having conversations about the work with people who have different points of view, I think that is when you are fortunate enough to get to the stage of defining your product with the tests and protecting it with what those tests leave behind. Some people would prefer to call them checks at that stage. And
Okay.
we've got the data to prove it that that actually does work. So I would say that the concept of testing ideas is a very helpful one, especially in a test-driven environment.
All right, and with that, we're a little over time. So we'll say thank you very much, Anthony. And please, everyone, feel free to reach out to Lisa and I. Our holistic testing book, which isn't on this particular page, I guess it is, it's sort of on the top. We talk about risk, testing ideas, and things a lot. Please feel free to contact us, and we will see you next month. Thank you very much. And
thanks so much, Anthony. Be sure to
bye-bye.
follow Anthony on LinkedIn and look at all his
Oh.
material on his website.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.